This is lecture 15. We're looking at, we had one other lecture on Proverbs, so this is Proverbs chapters 1 through 9, and we'll do an exegesis of that. And then we'll look at themes in Proverbs, and we will also then look at chapter 31. And, okay, so if you have a Bible, it'd be better if you opened it up and look at this. The title of the book is verse 1 of chapter 1, the Mishlei Shlomo, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. And we talked about that in the other video before this one. Verses 2 through 6 is the purpose of the book. And you see that in a series of infinitive statements to know, wisdom, and instruction, to comprehend the words of understanding, to receive the discipline of wisdom, justice and right, and equity, and to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion, that the wise man may hear and increase in learning, and the man of understanding may attain unto wise counsels, to understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. And then we've talked about verse 7 is the theme or the motto of the book, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. And then verses 8 and 9 is an introductory exhortation before we get into the first section, really big section of the book. Hear, my son, the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the teaching of your mother, because, or for, they shall be a ring of grace on your head, an adornment of grace on your head, and a chain, a decoration of honor around your neck. And then the first major section is chapter 1, 10 through 19, and it's a warning to the young man against joining gangs. In verses 10 through 14 is the enticement of the gang. They're saying, my sinners entice you, then don't consent to it. And they're offering incentives. Come with us, we'll lie in wait for blood, we'll lurk for an innocent without cause, we'll swallow them up alive as the grave and as they go down into the pit. And the reward of this is you will find all the precious substance. We'll fill our houses with spoil. Cast your lot among us. We'll have one purse. And then 15 through 19 is the punishment of the gang. So you have my son. See, in verse 15 you have my son, and then back in verse 10, my son. So verse 15, my son, here's what it really is, the punishment. Don't walk in the way with them. Restrain your foot from their path, because their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. In vain the net is spread in the eyes of any bird. You're like a bird that's not thinking and just flies right into the net. And they lie in wait for their own blood as well. And they're greedy of gain. So it's a warning against joining gangs. And that may be interesting in that in the time of Solomon they had a problem with gangs. Just like there's a problem with gangs throughout the world now in different places. Chapter 1, 20 through 33 is the call of wisdom. And wisdom is pictured or personified here as a woman. And she's issuing her call to all. And in the text, notice the places that she cries aloud in the streets. Without, it says, in the broad places, in the city, in the streets, and in the gates. And wisdom is appealing to three classes of people. In verse 22, how long you thoughtless, those who don't know. It's the same word as the simple, or maybe naive, in chapter 1 in verse 4. And the root meaning of that is to be wide open to anything, and a person hasn't made their mind up about anything. So they're the simple. That's wisdom calls to the simple, the thoughtless. She calls to the scorners or the scoffers. And the word for simple is petayim. The word for scoffers is letzim. And the scorners are those who mock at moral principles. They willfully ignore them. They corrupt others. And then she calls to fools in verse 22, and that's the word kesalim. And these are fools. It doesn't have to do with intellectual IQ. It has to do with moral IQ. They are the insensible. They hate knowledge. And so wisdom is appealing to those three classes of people as she cries out in these public places. In verses 24 and 25 is the rejection of wisdom. Because I have called and you refused, I stretched out my hand and no man attended. You have set at naught my counsel, and you wouldn't have my reproof. So the results of that in verses 26 through 33, through the end of the chapter, are calamity in verse 26 and 27, verses 26, 27. In your calamity, verse 26, mockery, I will mock. See, wisdom will mock at your calamity. And then in verse 28 and 29, abandonment, they will call me, but I will not answer. They'll seek me earnestly, but they shall not find me. They would have none of my counsel. They despise my reproof, and so they will have to suffer the consequences. It's the teaching is there will be a time when it's too late to answer the call of wisdom. Then in verse 31 is nausea as a result. They will eat of the fruit of their own way and be filled with their own devices. It's just almost just eating so much and being filled so that it makes you sick. So that's the result of rejecting wisdom. Now, in verse 32 and 33 is the summary of the argument. The waywardness of the thought shall slay them. The confidence of fools shall destroy them. But whoever hearkens to me, who listens to me, shall dwell securely, and shall be quiet without fear of evil. They contrast the fate of the foolish with the security of those who listen to wisdom. Now we come to chapter 2, 1 through 22, the fruits of wisdom. In verses 1 through 4 is the search for wisdom. My son, if you will receive my words, lay up my commandments, so that you will make your ear attend to wisdom and your heart incline to discernment. And discernment, as we saw in, I think, the previous video, is a word that means choosing between things. It's a word that means between, but choosing between. And if you call for understanding and you lift up your voice for discernment, and if you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasure, can be silver coins or silver ore, but you search for this like a precious thing, treasure. Valuables were hidden in secret places, and so you search for wisdom like that, you will gain the fruit. Verses 5 through 9 is the reward of wisdom. Notice in verses 1 through 4 you have statements like, if you seek, if you do this. And then verse 5 is the fulfillment of that. Then you shall understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. That's the reward of wisdom. And the Lord gives wisdom. Just like James says, if any of you lack wisdom, then you ask the Lord and he will give that to you. Out of his mouth comes knowledge and discernment. He lays up sound wisdom for the upright. He's a shield to those that walk in integrity, that he may guard the paths of justice and preserve the way of his godly ones. Then you shall understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good thing. And notice again, we'll come back to those three themes in verse 9 there of chapter 2. Back in chapter 1, where it talks about the purpose of the book, and in verse 3 of chapter 1, to receive the discipline of wisdom and justice, what is right, and equity. And then you have the same thing here in verse 9, to understand righteousness, what is right, justice, and justice or equity. So that's the reward of wisdom, 5 through 9. 10 through 19 is the advantage of wisdom. Wisdom shall enter into your heart, and knowledge shall be pleasant to your soul. And discretion will watch over you. Discernment shall guard you. And the advantage is it will deliver you, guard you from the way of evil, from men that speak these evil things. Leaves the paths of righteousness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice to do evil and delight in evil. So those who are not seeking wisdom rejoice in evil, and their crookedness is seen in their paths, their well-traveled paths. And it also delivers you from, in verse 16, the strange woman. That theme's going to occur several times in Proverbs. It's the adulterous woman, and also she's called the strange woman, and maybe because she has intermarried and her morals are not as of Israelite women. And you remember Solomon married many foreign wives, and they led his heart astray. So advantage of wisdom is it keeps you from this strange woman, this adulterous woman, and she makes smoother words, and she forsakes her husband of her youth and forgets the commandment of her God. And the result of following her is her house sinks down into death, her paths into the where the inhabitants of dead are, and the inhabitants of Sheol. You can't return from there. You can't come back to the paths of life. Verses 20 through 22 is an encouragement and warning that you'll walk in the way of good men and keep the paths of the righteous. For the upright shall dwell in the land, and the wholehearted shall remain in it. They walk in, just like God told Abraham in 17:1 of Genesis, walk before me and be wholehearted. It means steadfast in loyalty. In contrast to that, the wicked shall be cut off from the land, and the faithless shall be plucked up from it. Then we come to chapter 3, and there is the blessing of wisdom. A lot of this is just being repeated, and that's a part of teaching. It's a part of probably wisdom literature, this repetition. And there are exhortations in chapter 3 under the blessings of wisdom in verses 1 through 12. And the first one is to obey God. That's the verses 1 and 2. Don't forget my teaching. Let your heart keep my commandments, and length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. And you have these promises. You have promises in Torah: honor your father and mother. Your days shall be long in the land that I shall give you. And then Paul quotes that in Ephesians, that your days will be long upon the earth. And it doesn't mean necessarily that young people who died early, those who died young, disobeyed parents. It means that listening to wisdom, listening to the teaching of parents may keep you from some places where it could shorten your life. So verses 1 and 2, obey God. Verses 3 and 4, remember Him. Don't let kindness and truth forsake you. Bind it around your neck. Write it on the table of your heart, and you'll find grace and good favor, good understanding. You, as a consequence of doing this, then you'll find in the sight of God and man. Verses 5 and 6, trust God. So obey God, remember God, and then trust God, verses 5 and 6. You trust in the Lord with all your heart. The opposite of that would be to lean upon your own understanding. And in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. Don't lean for support upon your own understanding. That's fallible. But if you trust Him, then and acknowledge Him in all your ways, in the various pursuits and activities of life, you know Him, then He will make straight. Direct here is literally make straight. He'll remove obstacles, and He will help you to walk in those paths. And then verses 7 and 8, reverence God. Don't be wise in your own eyes, and fear the Lord. And we've talked about before that fear means to show reverence. And here, this, as we saw in 1:7, is the beginning of knowledge. And you fear Him, and you depart from evil. You reverence Him, you depart from evil. And it will be health to your navel, to your body, the center of existence of your body. And it will also be health, marrow to the bones. You'll be refreshed. So obey God, remember God, trust God, reverence God. And then verses 9 and 10, honor God. And he says, honor the Lord with your substance, with the first fruits of all your increase. And your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vat shall overflow with new wine. Now, again, we have to be careful here. This is not a prosperity teaching. This is general teaching. But he is saying that God will take care of you. In verses 11 and 12, you submit to God. And the submission is under the umbrella of suffering, God's discipline, God's chastening. Don't despise that chastening. Don't spurn His correction. And the writer of Hebrews quotes this. Don't reject His chastening. If unfortunate events happen to you, it may be a good idea at that point to ask, is God trying to get my attention in this? In verse 12, he tells us, for whom the Lord loves, He corrects. As a father, the son, in whom He delights. These chastenings of love that the rabbis speak of. Chapter 3, 13 through 18 is blessing. And it begins like Psalm 1. Blessed, happy is probably not a good translation. It's more of the blessedness is the person who finds wisdom. And the phrase is pretty frequent in Scripture. Blessed is the one who has found wisdom, and the man that obtains understanding. And it's better than, he says, silver, and better than fine gold, yellow gold, fine gold. It's better than rubies. Some modern translations have corals, like from the Red Sea in India. It brings length of days in her right hand, and in her left hand of wisdom are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are shalom, or peace. And she is a tree of life. A tree of life is the source of life. And the allusion there, of course, is back in Genesis in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. And it's repeated several times in Proverbs in 11:30 and in 13:12 and in 15:4. You have that phrase, the tree of life. And then you have it in the last book of the Bible, in Revelation, about the tree of life. So wisdom is a tree of life to those who lay hold upon her, and blessed is everyone who holds her fast. In the next section, this is chapter 3, 19 through 26, is wisdom and creation. And he says, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. You have that heavens and earth, going back to Genesis chapter 1. And it shows the power of God. By his knowledge, the depths were broken up and the skies dropped down the dew. Verses 21, 22 shows the provision of God under wisdom and creation. My son, don't let them depart from your eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, and so shall they be life to your soul and grace to your neck, like wearing a chain around your neck, jewelry. And then verses 23 through 26 is the protection of God. Then you shall walk in your way securely, and you will not dash your foot against a stone. Say you're walking along and you hit a stone. God is protecting you. It's his protection. And when you lie down, you'll not be afraid. And when you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. It'll be undisturbed. That is, if you seek wisdom. And he says, don't be afraid of sudden terror, a frightening experience that comes suddenly or unexpectedly, or of the destruction of the wicked when it comes. Devastation caused by wicked men. He's not saying that wicked men are destroyed. It's the destruction that comes from wicked men. And he says, your confidence, your reliance will be upon the protection of God. For the Lord will be your protection, your confidence, and he'll keep your foot from being caught in the snares like the evil ones will set. So that's wisdom in creation, 19 through 26. Then 27 through 35, that's the end of this chapter 3. The duties of wisdom. And there's an exhortation in verses 27 through 30 regarding benevolence. Don't withhold good from him to whom it is due. To its owners, literally, is what it says. And the Jewish commentators understand this to mean charity to the poor, because the poor have a claim on that. And the Septuagint also has this as poor. So he says, don't withhold good and showing love and charity when it's in your power to do that. Don't say to your neighbor, go and come again, and tomorrow I will give, when you have it with you, when you have it by you. The idea is it is the meaning for one to ask again. So don't say go and then come again. And then in verse 29, do not devise evil against your neighbor. And he dwells securely by you. He's unsuspecting. He has your trust, and he trusts you. And then you're devising evil. Strive not with a man without cause, if he has done you no harm. Don't deliberately pick a quarrel or stir up contention. And there's warnings all throughout Proverbs about contentiousness. in 10:12 and 13:10 and so on. And then in verses 31 through 35 is a warning against the wicked. Do not envy the man of violence, and choose none of his ways. They have riches or by violence, illegal means. Don't be envious of them. Verse 32, the perverse is an abomination to the Lord. It's something that is a repellent to God, and it is a strong word. But his counsel is with the upright. God's counsel, his intimate relationship, is with the upright. The curse of the Lord is in the house of the wicked, but he blesses the habitation, the house of the righteous. If it is concerning the scorners, he scorns them, but to the humble he gives grace. And that's quoted in the New Testament as well. That's the opposite of the scorners, those who have humility. The humble obtain favor, the humble obtain grace in his sight. The wise shall inherit honor, and this is wise in ethical sense. It means the ones who are following wisdom. But for fools, they carry away shame. Each of them carries away shame as the allotted portion. That's what the fools earn. Remember back in chapter 1, verse 7, the theme of the book, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now, in chapter 4, 1 through 27 is the discipline of wisdom. And really what sets these first 9 chapters apart from the rest of the book is they can be exegeted in sections, like a whole paragraph, about like any other text in the Bible. What sets these apart from chapters 10 and following is you don't have just one proverb right after another. So chapter 4 is the discipline of wisdom, and it's an admonition. And you have from the father, you have from the grandfather, and then it comes back to the father. Verses 1 through 4 of chapter 4 is the father's exhortation. And he says, I'll give you good teaching, good doctrine, what you may receive. Don't forsake my Torah, my teaching, my direction. I was a son to my father. I was tender and only one in the sight of my mother. It's talking about how close relationship he had with his parents. And he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forsake them, neither decline from the words of my mouth. And so he's talking now about what he received, and so we have now the grandfather's appeal in verses 4 through 9. Don't forsake wisdom. Wisdom will preserve you. Love wisdom and keep it. The beginning of wisdom is get wisdom. Extol her, exalt her, and she'll bring you honor when you embrace her. In verse 9, it will be a crown on your head, a crown of glory. And then verses 10 through 13 is the grandfather's promise. Hear, my son, and receive my sayings, and the years of your life shall be many. I've taught you in the way of wisdom. I've led you in the paths of uprightness. I've directed you in the way of wisdom. When you go, your step will the road of wisdom is allows for free movement. If you run, you will not stumble, because God has removed the stumbling blocks. In verse 13, take hold fast of instruction. Don't let her go. Keep her, for she is your life. But in verses 14 through 19 is the grandfather's warning. Don't enter into the paths of the wicked. Don't walk in the way of evil men. Leave it alone. Avoid it. Leave that path alone. Don't pass by it, turn from it, from upon it, and pass on. You don't even need to set one foot in this path. You don't walk on it, but don't set one foot in this path. Don't even go for a short distance in this, because the wicked do not sleep, because they're constantly devising violence, and their sleep is taken away unless they cause some to fall, or unless they fall, as some readings may have. And they eat the bread of wickedness. Their livelihood is derived from wickedness. They drink the wine of violence. But the path of the righteous is a light of the dawn, the light of brightness. It's just like the sun shining at its full strength at noon. It shines more and more to the perfect day, the standing firm of the day. It's like the sun at noontime is so bright. But the way of the wicked is as darkness, thick darkness, like in the plagues the plague in Egypt, the darkness that's there. And they know not at what they stumble. Sooner or later in this thick darkness, deep darkness, they don't have light, and so they're going to stumble. You can't avoid stumbling. So the discipline and wisdom, the father's exhortation, the grandfather's appeal, the grandfather's promise, the grandfather's warning. And then verses 20 through 27 is the father's appeal again, it appears. He says, "My son, listen to my words. Incline your ear, bend your ear to my sayings. Don't let them depart from your eyes. Keep them in the middle of your heart, deep in your mind." Heart in Scripture, I think we probably talked about before, is not the emotions or the physical heart. It's the intellect, the thinking, the mind. And so he says, because they are life to those who find them, and health to all their flesh. And it's a variant of what we saw in 3:8. And above all that, you guard, keep your heart. Watch your heart. Watch your thinking, because out of it are the issues of life, or the source of life. Put away from you the crookedness of a mouth and perverse lips, the turning aside of the lips. As Jesus says, our words reveal our heart. Let your eyes look straight on, and your eyelids, your gazing, look straight before you, and make plain the path of your feet. Don't wander around aimlessly. You mentally weigh the alternatives. You look and you follow wisdom. You don't turn to the right nor to the left, and you remove your foot from evil. You refuse to deviate from the right way. Now in chapter 5, he moves into a theme that occurs several times in the book, and it's wisdom in sexual matters, and it's a plea for purity. And so he says, "My son, listen to wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding." And so verse 1 through 6 is the deception of the adulteress, that you may preserve discretion, and it's intense here, and that your lips may keep knowledge, preserve knowledge. And the reason is, in verse 3, the strange woman, the adulterous woman, her lips drop honey. As honey drips from the comb, she utters enticing words. And her mouth, her palate is smoother than oil. It appears attractive and is a great temptation. But her end is as bitter as wormwood. And this is always used in the Bible of something that's harmful and bitter. The root meaning of this is a curse. Bitterness is the result of her words and her life. And it's sharp as a sword that has several mouths. a two-edged sword, an all-devouring sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of Sheol. And lest you should walk the even path of life. This is a difficult text here, but the idea is you stay on the plain paths of righteousness and wisdom, but her ways wander. And really she doesn't know that because she doesn't follow wisdom. Verses 7 through 14 is the danger of adultery. Again, he says, listen to me. Don't let my words depart from your mouth. Remove your way far from her, and don't come near the door of her house. In verse 8, don't take care that you come in reach of her. The idea is don't play with fire because you're going to be burned. You remove your way far from her. And in verse 9, the dangers of adultery is you give your vigor, your majesty, your splendor to others, and you will lose your life. In verse 10, lest strangers be filled with your strength, and your labors be in the house of a stranger, an alien. And you will say in the end, how I hated instruction and my heart despised reproof, and how I wish I'd listened to the voice of my teachers, not incline my ear to her. And verses 15 through 19, he gives the delights of marriage in the setting of this adulterous woman, the delights of marriage. Drink waters out of your own cisterns. And the language here is symbolic, and it's symbolic of the physical relations in marriage. You find contentment in a lawful wife, and you let your springs be dispersed abroad and courses of water in the streets. Your duty is with your wife. Let it be with her and not with a stranger. And you have joy, verse 18, in the wife of your youth. Verse 9, he describes in figurative terms that's used in Song of Songs and other places in the Hebrew Scriptures, a lovely hind and a graceful doe. And again, using figurative language, you be satisfied with her, you be ravished with her. The verb means real, and be satisfied. Verses 20 through 23 comes back to the danger and disaster of adultery. Why then will you be ravished with a strange woman and embrace the bosom of this stranger or alien? Because the ways of humans, ways of man, are before the eyes of the Lord, and he makes even all his paths. His own iniquities shall ensnare the wicked, and this wicked will die for lack of instruction. So this is a chapter about wisdom in sexual matters, the deception of the adulteress, the dangers of adultery, the delights of marriage, and the disaster of adultery. Chapter 6, as some commentators put this, and that's how I put it in the outline here, it's illustrations of foolishness, and it may be threats to marital happiness, but and that's an interpretation, but it's threats to wisdom. And in verse 1 through 5, there's a warning against reckless pledges. Don't become a surety, a guarantee for your neighbor, for a stranger, and you'll be snared by the words of your mouth and caught by the words of your mouth. And if you do this, then you're going to humble yourself and urge your neighbor, don't sleep, but you try to deliver yourself, in verse 5, as a gazelle from the hand of the hunter. From the hand is the idea, is a bird from the hand of the one who's hunting birds. Verses 6 through 11 is the danger or the warning against laziness or slothfulness. And he gives the illustration of an ant. Go to the ant, you sluggard. And throughout Proverbs you have the slothful or the sluggard along with the fool. Consider her ways, be wise, and it's very industrious. Has no chief, overseer, or ruler, and provides her bread in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. And the ant is referred to also in chapter 30, verse 25. In Job 12, verse 7 and following, we're told to learn something from the birds, the beast, and fish. But you look to the ant in the industriousness of the ant. How long will you sleep, O sluggard? When will you arise? In verse 10, just a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands. But what will happen is your poverty will come, and your poverty will come quickly upon you, and you'll be destroyed. Verses 12 through 15 is a warning against deceitfulness, a man of iniquity. He talks with a mischievous tongue. He winks with his eyes. It's just like when we talk about somebody may talk about somebody and they wink their eyes. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Insinuating something. He scrapes with his feet, points with his fingers. But really what's in his heart is deceitfulness, and he's devising evil and sowing discord. Therefore his calamity will come suddenly. He'll be broken and without remedy. Then there in verses 16 through 19, pretty famous passage, but 7 vices that are hateful to God. Let me turn that off right there. 7 vices that are hateful to God. And a form is used here when it says 6 things which the Lord hates. Yes, 7 which are an abomination to him. You find this type of language in other places. In Job chapter 5 and verse 19. It's just a rhetorical way of saying something. The list is not to be an exhaustive list. But the 7 things that are here are, first of all, haughty eyes. That's the sin of pride. Don't be filled with pride. That's one thing that God hates. The rabbi said, whoever is possessed of an arrogant spirit, the Holy One, said, blessed is he, says, I and he cannot dwell in the world together. Then a lying tongue, and that's a thing that God hates. Hands that shed innocent blood, murder. It's like in the 10 Commandments, you shall not murder. Then that's the 3. Number 4, a heart that devises wicked thoughts, he says. And so again, it's this wickedness and the thinking that is always devising that. Feet that are swift in running. 2 verbs are here, hurrying to run, and the feet are swift in running, and they're running to evil. Eagerness to do evil is the idea. False witness that breathes out lies, and that would be perjury, and that would be lying. It would also be false testimony. And then the last one, number 7, those who sow discord among brothers. And in Psalm 133, it talks about how blessed it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. This is the complete opposite of that. So those are the 7 things that God hates. And we're back again to the theme 20 through 38, back to a theme 20 through 35 through the end of chapter 6. And it's a warning again about adultery, and he introduces this with the value of wisdom, verse 20 through 24. Don't you keep the commandment of your father, don't forsake the teaching of your mother, bind them continually on your heart, tie them on your neck. When you walk, it'll lead you. When you lie down, it'll watch over you. When you awake, it shall talk with you. And that reminds us of Deuteronomy chapter 6, and about hear the Lord hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And you speak of this when you get up, when you walk, when you lie down. And he says in verse 23, this commandment is a lamp. This teaching is light to you. The reproofs of instruction are the way of life. And then 24 leads up to this again, to keep you from the evil woman, the woman of evil, from the smoothness of the strange woman. We've already seen language about her. Verse 25 is the admonition of wisdom, and admonition of wisdom in this context. Do not lust after her in your heart. And again, the heart and the eyes are tied together as agents of sin. And the mind, if the mind becomes engrossed with the thoughts of a forbidden woman, then the temptation becomes strong. So don't let her captivate you with her eyelids. It's been suggested by commentators, the custom of ancient Near Eastern women of blackening their eyes to add brilliance to that. But it probably is talking about the seductive nature of the woman, of lifting of the eyes. So verse 26 through 35 is arguments against adultery. Here are the reasons why not. Because on account of a harlot, a man is brought to a loaf of bread, deprived of the means of enjoying comforts, and forced to keep himself alive with just minimum food. He's reduced to just extreme poverty. And the adulteress is hunting for precious life. Now, can a man take fire in his bosom? The fold of a garment would have to be used as a pocket and not be burned? And the answer is no. Can you walk upon hot coals and your feet walk barefoot on hot coals and your feet not be burned? And the answer is no. But so is he that goes to his neighbor's wife. It will be punished, he says. Men do not despise a thief if he steal to satisfy his hunger. He's not approving of this, but he is saying that it's understood. He's not saying it's right, but it would be understood. But if he's found, he must restore sevenfold. That's according to the law, to Torah in Exodus 21 and Exodus 22. He gives the substance, all the substance of his house. But he that commits adultery, he says, with a woman lacks understanding, forfeits everything he has, forfeits his life. And in doing it, he destroys himself. There are wounds and dishonor he'll get. And then he talks about in verse 34 the jealousy of the woman's husband, and he will not spare any. He will not regard any ransom, any pay, and neither will he rest content, though you may give him many bribes, many gifts. So again, there's a strong encouragement there against adultery in 6:20 through 35. Now, chapter 7, this continues on in a very vivid picture. In verses 1 through 5 is the introduction. He said, keep my words, keep my commandments with you, keep my commandments and live, and my teaching as the apple of your eye. The apple of your eye is the pupil of the eye. You bind them on your fingers, you write them on the table of your hearts. And again, that's like Deuteronomy 6. In verse 8, it is probably figurative language. But some of this language was taken as literal by Jewish writers. You say unto wisdom, you are my sister. You love wisdom and call understanding your kinswoman. And he says that they may keep you from the strange woman, from the alien woman that makes smooth her words. So that's the introduction. Then in verses 6 through 12, well, really 6 and continuing, he talks about an incident that he saw at the window of my house through the wall. There's lattice work, and he looked out, and I looked through the lattice and saw among the thoughtless ones, I saw among the ones, again, whose minds are wide open, I discerned among the the young ones, the inexperienced ones, a young man void of understanding, and passing through the street near her corner, and I think he's talking probably about the prostitute. And he went on the way to her house. And in the twilight, literally in the cool breeze, which springs up in the afternoon, in the evening at sunset, in the blackness of night, darkness has set in, intense darkness of the night. He says, here's what I saw. And behold, there met him a woman, and she had the clothes of a prostitute. And her heart, she is concealing her motives in this. And really, she is not a respectable woman. She is rebellious. She struggles to break loose from following God. Her feet don't abide in her own house, and now she's in the streets, and she's in the broad places, and she's at the corner. And this may be echoing also, you remember when we said the way where wisdom calls in the streets and in the broad places. But here also is this woman, and she caught him and kissed him, and she hardened her face and said to him, sacrifices and peace offerings, like according to the law in Leviticus 7. These were sacrifices that were offered, and the part of it went to God, and part of it was to be eaten, but it was to be eaten on that day or the next day. And she says that I have paid my vows. So she has a lot of good food, and she's using this as bait to attract him. And so verse 15, I have this meal ready, and I don't want to eat it alone. And I came out and I was looking for you, and I found you. I was looking especially for you, and I found you. And I have decked my bed with perfume and with all these expensive cloth from Egypt, highest quality. So come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. And because my husband, and in the Hebrew literally it says, she says for the man, is not at home. It's a contemptuous way of referring to her husband. So he's not here, so you don't have to fear anything or any consequences. He's gone on a long journey, and he has taken the bag of money with him, and that may indicate he's on some business trip. And he wouldn't surprise us, and he will come home at the full moon. That's many days after this. In verse 9, the implication is that this occurred on a moonless night in the blackness of night. But he will come back at the full moon. So there's going to be some time. In verse 21, with her much fair speech, she caused him to yield. With the smoothness of her lips, she enticed him, and he went away straightway. So her enticements are in verses 13 through 20, and then 21, 22, his indiscretion. He goes suddenly, straightway, suddenly, as an ox that goes to the slaughter. And he says he's a fool to go down. Now, the exhortations in verses 24 through the end of the chapter, therefore, because of this, listen to me, hearken to me, tend to my words. Don't let your heart decline to her ways. Don't go in her paths. She, in verse 26, has cast down many wounded. Many have fallen by her, and her house is the way to Sheol. It goes down to the chambers of death. All right, in chapter 8, we have the excellence of wisdom. Just like, again, the harlot, the prostitute, has been lurking around, and she calls. Now in chapter 8, we have the excellence of women and the call of wisdom. Verses 1 through 5. Does not wisdom call? It's a rhetorical question. Yes. In the top of high places, most elevated, conspicuous places to attract the largest number of listeners, where the paths meet, the house of the crossroads, beside the gates. That's where business was conducted. It's public places here at the entrance to the city. And wisdom cries aloud. So wisdom is there to hear, or to hear if you will hear wisdom. So he's calling to you. Oh, men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. And he says, you thoughtless, understand prudence, and you fools, be of an understanding heart. So wisdom is calling out, and it's going to show the excellence of wisdom. Verses 6 through 11 is wisdom's worth. Here I'll tell you excellent things. The opening of my lips will be right things. Truth. Wickedness is an abomination. It's repellent to my lips. The words of my mouth are in righteousness. There's nothing perverse, twisted, or crooked in them. They're all plain and right. Receive my instruction. He says in verse 10, it's better than silver, better than pure gold. For wisdom is better than rubies. And we've heard sayings like that back in chapter 3. And all things desirable are not even compared to her. Now, verses 12 through 21 is wisdom's claims. High claims. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence with those who want to become wise. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogance and the evil way, and the haughty mouth. Counsel is mine, and sound wisdom. I am understanding. Power is mine. By me kings reign, by me princes rule, nobles, judges. I love those that seek me, and those that seek me earnestly shall find me. Riches and honor are with me. My fruit is better than gold, better than fine gold, and I walk in the way of righteousness, that I may cause those who love me to inherit substance. And the Lord, I'm getting ahead here. He says, wisdom makes these claims of excellence, these high and noble claims. And then verses 22 through 26 is wisdom's origins. The Lord made me at the beginning of his way. To have such high claims as wisdom has made, then wisdom says that I was created at the beginning of his ways, the first of his works of old. Now, some people have tried to make this chapter a picture of Christ, and I think there's difficulty here because it talks about wisdom being created. Of course, in the New Testament, Christ is associated with wisdom. He is the wisdom of God. Yet this is wisdom personified. This is wisdom speaking, and wisdom says, I have been here from old. I was set up from everlasting. The first of the works of God. And wisdom's origin continues in verse 24. There were no depths. I was brought forth. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills I was brought forth. While as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the beginning of the dust of the world. And then verse 27 through 31 is wisdom's work. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he set a circle upon the face of the deep. And we talked about that, I think, in Job 22. Job 22:14, the vault of the heavens. To the ancient people, the earth appeared as a circular disc that was covered by the sky. It had this vaulted canopy on the face of the deep, he says, and that's the oceans. When he made firm the skies, when the fountains of the deep showed their might. Wisdom's work was, wisdom was involved in creation. I was there, wisdom says. I was daily, all delight. Day by day. You may be alluding again to the days of creation. My delights are with the sons of men. Verses 32 through 35 is wisdom's closing appeal and the closing exhortation. Now therefore, you children, listen to me, for blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction, be wise, and don't refuse it. Blessed is the one that hearkens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the post of the doors. Because whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor of the Lord. He that misses me wrongs his own soul, himself. And all that hate me love death. So wisdom's final exhortation there. Now, as we said, we're moving into chapter 9. And this is the last chapter before the majority of the book is like one proverb right after another in various themes. But in chapter 9, we've seen the strange woman and her invitation. We've seen wisdom's invitation as a woman. And here they're brought together of wisdom and folly. So foolishness is calling out, wisdom is calling out. And so in both invitations, and the question is, which are you going to listen? Which way are you going to choose? You're going to choose the way of wisdom, or you're going to choose the way of folly? And we talked about, I think, in the first video on Proverbs, how that it becomes a very simple choice between one or the other. Two paths. Which way are you going to go? Which invitation are you going to listen to? So verses 1 through 3 of chapter 9 is the house of wisdom. Now notice you have the house of wisdom in 9, 1 through 3. And then in 9, 13 through 15, you have the house of folly. And then 9, 4 through 6, you have the invitation of wisdom. And then 9, 16, and 17, you have the invitation of folly. And then 9, 7 through 12, really, the exclusion and incentive of wisdom, the end result. And then 9, 18 is the end result of folly. So the two are contrasted here. 1 through 3 is the house of wisdom. Wisdom has built her house for receiving guests. It's in contrast to the house of immorality. And she's hewn out 7 pillars. That's showing it's a big, massive, like a mansion built around a courtyard. And it's supported by 3 pillars on each side. And 7 in biblical language a lot of times means, that which is complete. And that may be going on here, I don't know. She's prepared her meat. She slaughtered her food. It's a banquet. She's mingled her wine with spices. She's furnished her table. In Psalm 23:5, you prepare a table before my enemies. That's the same phrase that's here. It's a table is not a table like we would think of a table. It would be a mat of skin that's spread out on the ground. She has sent forth her maidens. She is called, and upon the high places of the city. So it's prominent. Wisdom is calling, the house of wisdom. And then in verses 4 through 6 is the invitation. Whoever is thoughtless, and this is the simple one, the naive one, the one we've been seeing, the one who has a mind wide open. That's what simple means. Let him turn here. The one who lacks understanding and yet is willing to learn. She says to him, come, eat of my bread. It's an invitation. Come, eat of my bread, and drink the wine which I have mingled. Forsake all thoughtlessness, and live and walk in the way of understanding. And then the exclusion of wisdom is verses 7 through 10. He that corrects a scorner gets himself shame. He that reproves a wicked man, it becomes to him a blot. Scorners are unteachable, is the idea. Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. You give to a wise man, and he'll be yet wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. And then verse 10 is the theme from 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the All-Holy is understanding. For by me, by wisdom, your days shall be multiplied, and the years of your life shall be increased. So again, the incentive of wisdom. If you want to be wise, then listen to me. That's 11 and 12. Now, as we said, verse 13 through 15, folly has a house as well. The woman folly is righteous. So wisdom is feminine as a woman crying out. Folly is feminine as well. Folly's invitation. That's foolish woman. She is thoughtless. She doesn't know anything. And she sits at the door of her house on a seat in the high places of the city. So it's the same picture is given here. And she calls to those who pass by, who go right on their ways. And then the invitation of folly in verse 16, notice it's the same. Whoever is thoughtless, that's the one whose mind is open and hasn't made any decision, let him turn in here. And the one who lacks understanding, she says to him, and instead of saying, come and eat my bread, she says, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant, in verse 17. It's the attractiveness of the forbidden. And he doesn't know, because he hasn't made up his mind, he's not seeking wisdom, that the end result, the end, is death. Her guests are in the depths of Sheol. That's the end result of listening to folly. Now, in Proverbs, as we said, 1 through 9 is basically where we can exegete extended passages like this. 10 through 30 is a section where you have one proverb right after another, and maybe a good way of dealing with this is to look at various themes. Now, we're not going to read all of these proverbs here, but I do want to talk about or mention the various themes, some themes that are found in Proverbs. One is anger, and there are the proverbs that mention anger. Another is cheerful heart, and there are proverbs that mention that. Talks about companions and friends, and there are a lot of proverbs about that. We've already talked about a little bit about the woman of wisdom and the woman of folly and the strange woman, the adulterous woman. There's another woman, is the contentious woman, and there are proverbs about her. It talks about diligence in contrast to slothfulness, in contrast to the sluggard, and there are proverbs about that. It talks a lot about parents and children, and there are proverbs there about parents and children. In fact, the whole book, my son, listen to the instruction of your father, instruction of your mother. It talks about a lot about money, possessions, and benevolence. It talks about pride in those proverbs, about relations with others. And I mean, if you wanted to preach a sermon or teach a class, you could take some of these themes and then look at these various proverbs. It talks about the righteous and the wise and rulers. It says a lot about our speech, because the speech shows the heart. It talks about the wicked and the fool. And then it talks about wine in those passages there. Wisdom is a major theme, as wisdom is pictured as calling out and giving an invitation. The wise woman. And then it talks about the Word of God. Now let's go over to chapter 31. And it's a pretty famous passage about this woman of valor. And at the end of the book is this acrostic poem. And one thing that may tie this together is, remember, the theme is Proverbs 1, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And then in Proverbs chapter 31, it talks about this woman and what characterizes her at the end of the book in verse 30. A woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And that's like bookends on one end of the book and then the other end of the book. And it's this theme of fearing the Lord. And so this is an acrostic poem in the Hebrew, and it's about this woman of valor. And the Hebrew here is Eshet Kael. Kael means valiant. When it's used of a man, it's referring about a mighty soldier. Eshet means a woman, and so it's the woman of valor, of strength. Traditionally in Judaism, every week Jewish men and children recite this poem to their wives or mothers. Her textual identity here in Proverbs, the text of Proverbs doesn't name the noble woman, but it describes her in great detail. And the author of this poem is presumably King Lemuel, who was known by Israel's wise men, even though he remains unknown to us. Some rabbis have tried to make him to be Solomon, but I think his name is Lemuel. And he received this instruction from his own mother. And so his instruction is he must look for a truly valiant wife who fears the Lord and not be tempted by mere beauty and charm. And the terms that are used here are a lot of terms that are military terms, military heroes. So she's raised to heroic status because of the good she does for her people. And she's in contrast to the foolish woman who tears down her household. And as we saw earlier, folly is pictured as a woman crying out. In Proverbs 14:1, the wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down. So this woman is the wise woman who fears the Lord. She's not like this foolish woman here. Now, a couple of assumptions about this woman of valor. One is she's a mature woman. Secondly, her husband is a wise and mature man. He's sitting in the gates. Assumption number 3, her household is economically well off. She has servants. She's able to carry on a business, and she's traveling a lot. Assumption number 4 is she is a healthy woman. In verse 17 it says, she sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. And then verse 25, she is clothed with strength. These assumptions are important because we can't just take this and make the details of this refer to every woman of God. These assumptions must be true, I think, for all these details. Now, the general truth is that this woman fears the Lord, and that can be true of anyone. What makes her different from her counterparts from this text? A couple of things. Number 1, her focus is on God. She hates evil. She is compassionate and fair to all. She delights in the Lord's commands. She's teachable, and she is a peacemaker. There is also a connection here because the only place this phrase, Eshet Kael, occurs in the Hebrew Scriptures, and the only other place is in the book of Ruth. And so the identity of this Proverbs 31 woman is enhanced by place this book before the book of Ruth in the Hebrew Bible, in the order in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible you have Proverbs, then you have Ruth. The wise men who were responsible for organizing the final Tanakh of the Tanakh, they saw a relationship between the noble wife of Proverbs 31 and Ruth, the widowed Moabite woman. In the Hebrew Bible, Ruth is considered an addendum to the book of Proverbs. And the character of Ruth is portrayed as a historical example of this virtuous woman, this woman of valor in Proverbs 31. Boaz calls Ruth a woman of noble character. In Ruth chapter 3, verse 11, Boaz says of Ruth, all my fellow townsmen, literally those at the city gate, so he's sitting at the gate, know that you are a woman of noble character. That's this phrase, Eshet Kael. So Boaz says of Ruth, the ancestress of David, precisely what the poem in Proverbs 31 says of the virtuous woman. The Hebrew used in 31:10 of Proverbs is exactly that used to describe Ruth. Now, you think about it, on the surface there is little a similarity between the noble woman of Proverbs 31 and Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite. The Proverbs 31 woman appears to be an Israelite. Proverbs 31 woman has a husband and children who call her blessed. Ruth was a childless widow when Boaz makes that statement. The woman in Proverbs 31 is comparatively wealthy. I mean, she's able to carry on businesses and to send and give. She has resources. But Ruth is forced to glean in the fields the grain that others had missed. The Proverbs 31 woman had apparently been raised among the people of Yahweh, yet in contrast, Ruth had spent most of her life in a pagan land. Yet both of these, the Proverbs 31 woman and Ruth, are declared Ashet Chayil, women of valor. And there's a connection between the two. So what do they have in common? What they have in common is they both feared the Lord. Now I think this connection between Ruth and the Proverbs 31 woman is important, because when we see the relationship between Ruth and the Proverbs 31 woman, that removes many of the stumbling blocks that women may encounter when reading Proverbs 31. So it's possible to be this noble woman, whether married or single. And it's possible to be this noble woman and not keep all the details of Proverbs 31. Ruth is this Ashet Chayil. She's this virtuous woman. And there are women like Ruth and the Proverbs 31 woman today, many women. So in the last section here in this video, I want us to talk about one thing, and that is the wise man according to Proverbs, an outline. Again, I don't know where I don't have the notes of where this is from, but it's not original with me. But this is more of a thematic way of looking at this. This wise man, according to Proverbs, his character, he's teachable, he's not intractable. He receives and loves instruction up under this. He grows in wisdom. You can see those Proverbs. He is righteous, not wicked. He fears the Lord. He hates what is false. He shuns evil. He does what is righteous. He speaks the truth. He is humble, not proud. He is self-controlled, not rash. He has a calm spirit. He's slow to become angry. That's about his character. Now we come to his actions. And his actions show his character. He's cautious. He's not hasty. He thinks before he acts. He thinks before he speaks. He is forgiving, not vindictive. He is patient. He is concerned about goodwill and peace. He forgives those who wrong him. He's not vindictive, as we said. And then his relationships. So we have seen his actions and his character. Now we move to his relationships. And the primary relationship to the Lord is he fears the Lord. And that's the beginning of the book, and that's the meaning of the book. He reverences the Lord. That's why all these other areas of his life fall in line. He trusts in the Lord. He's ever mindful of the Lord. He chooses the Lord's way or wisdom. He submits to the Lord's discipline. He confesses his sin. And then under his relationship to the Lord is his relationship to his family. And up under his family, to his parents, he respects them. He listens to them. Over and over the book says, listen, my son, to the instruction of your father, instruction of your mother. He seeks to bring them honor and joy, and he does that by being wise, by being righteous, and being diligent. And then in relationship to his wife, to his family, to his parents, and now to his wife, he appreciates her. He views her as a gift from the Lord, and he views her as his crowning glory. He praises her, and we get into Proverbs 31 here. He trusts her, And we get into the warnings against adultery. He's faithful to her, chapter 5. And then relationship to his parents, to his wife, now to his children. He loves them. He is concerned about them, and he trains them. And reasons for training them bring his own peace of mind and joy, and also the child's honor and well-being. And by teaching and instructing them, that's how he trains them, and by disciplining them. And it talks about verbal discipline and also physical discipline in this book. He provides for their physical needs, and he provides for their spiritual heritage as well. Then in his relationships, so you have to the Lord, to his family, now to his friends and neighbors. To his friends, he values them. He's a good friend. He's constant to them. He gives them counsel. To his neighbors, he fulfills his obligations, being a good neighbor. He strives for peace. He doesn't outstay his welcome. He doesn't deceive or mislead them. So now we've talked about his character, about his actions, about his relationships. Now we talk about his words. And Proverbs says a lot about words, about our words. And the wise man, his words, and we see in this book the power and limitations of his words. The power is they have the power of life and death. They have the power to heal or to wound. Their limitation is they're no substitute for deeds, just like John says, let us love not in words, but also in actions and deeds. And they cannot alter the facts. The words cannot alter the facts, and they can't compel a response. And then the character of his words, and this should have been the same size font as the other, but they are honest. They're not false. They are few, not many. They are not boastful. They're not argumentative. They're not contentious. Well, there it is again. I must have not deleted that slide. And he's not a gossip, revealing secrets and spreading slander. And I think that's the last slide in this section. And this is our last video on Proverbs. No, we're continuing on. His words are calm. They're not emotional. They're rational, gentle, and peaceful, yet they're persuasive. They are apt, not untimely, and that has to do with tact and the proper way of saying things and when to say things. And the source of his words come from his heart, from his thinking, from his character. And he is righteous negatively. He is not proud and hateful. And I'm pretty sure that